Hi, I'm Brad Rexley, former Vice President for Disney's Epcot theme park, and you're listening to the Coaster Challenge podcast.
Hi there, I'm Lee Cockrell. I'm the former Executive Vice President of Walt Disney World, and Mickey Mouse was my boss. And you're listening to the Coaster Challenge podcast.
Do you accept the Coaster Challenge? Yes, I accept the Coaster Challenge. Do you accept the Coaster Challenge? Coaster Challenge podcast is here. It's time to face your fears. Get that theme park therapy and let us blow through your Coaster Challenge podcast is here. Your fear can disappear. We know that theme park therapy can dry up all your tears. Do you accept the Coaster Challenge? Yes, I accept the Coaster Challenge. Do you accept the Coaster Challenge? We accept because you know we're not average.
You're listening to the Coaster Challenge podcast. A journey where people become fearful to fearless, all from riding roller coasters. So please secure your hats and glasses and keep your hands and arms inside the podcast. It's time to accept the Coaster Challenge with your host, Kim Dykes.
This is Kim with the Coaster Challenge podcast, and today I'm talking with Don Hilbig, the current area manager of digital marketing and former public relations person at Kings Island. Our executive producer, Andrew, will also be joining us today. While Don's work at the park is highly recognized, he is also well known as a theme park enthusiast who has set several world records for his number of rides on the racer at Kings Island. Welcome to the podcast, Don.
Well, thanks for having me, Kim. Looking forward to talking with you.
All right. Well, let's get started with you telling us about yourself.
Well, I was born in Cincinnati, and I've lived here most of my life. I've had some stops because of where I was working at the time. Louisville, Kentucky. I lived there for a little while. Late '80s. Greensboro, North Carolina. Albany, New York. But before Kings Island, I spent 18 years in professional hockey. I was a media relations director. I'm also a play-by-play radio broadcaster. So I was doing that. I was in Albany when the opportunity to come to Kings Island and be the park's public relations area manager back in 2007. And at the time, I really loved what I was doing in hockey. It was very well established there, but it was an opportunity to come back home to Cincinnati, but also, be able to do something that, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to work at Kings Island in a marketing capacity. So, the opportunity was there. I looked at it as nothing ventured, nothing gained, while we really were having a good time in Albany. And just came back and started 2007.
Well, it is so interesting to hear all of that about you. You are clearly a man of many talents. From my experience with you and at Kings Island, you've brought some wonderful, wonderful things to the theme park community. And we are very appreciative of that. Now, we're going to get started with our questions. And our first questions are going to be about roller coasters. What was your very first coaster that you remember riding?
The first coaster that I ever rode, and I do remember riding it very well, like it was yesterday, was the racer at Kings Island. Now, the year before, Coney Island in Cincinnati was in its final season. That was the big thing that my family, we would do that every year. Now, we didn't go on vacations to like Florida and, like all the other kids in the neighborhood and that were doing. Our vacations were going to Coney Island. We would go Memorial Day weekend with our cousins. We would go 4th of July. We would go. So we're there on Labor Day, the last day the park's open. I had not ever been on a roller coaster before. I was always intrigued by the Shooting Star, which was similar to the racer. I went line. You had ride tickets you had to give. So I dropped my tickets in the box, went through, sat in the seat, and then got out. The train behind it, it would go through like a little helix tunnel, and it was just so loud. And, when you're that young, it just kind of frightened me a little bit. And I got out of the seat and didn't ride it. Biggest regret I have in terms of my involvement with the amusement theme park industry, my whole life there. But the next year, Kings Island's open and wasn't down the street from us. I grew up in Anderson Township, which is near where Coney Island is. So it was, as my dad referred to, out in the boondocks with Mason, Ohio, from where we live. So it was a once a year type of thing. So we went that year one time, and I looked at the racer, and I was intrigued by it, but it was so massive back then. It was the longest, the tallest, the fastest roller coaster out there at the time. Hard to believe now when you look right behind it, you got Orion dwarfs the ride. But it, just beautiful with the red, white, and blue. And I kept looking at it. My cousins who we went with, they're cycling through and they're riding it over and over again. They keep, asking me to go ride it with them. I want to know part of it. Well, finally, my cousin Paul, he says, well, how about I'll give you 50 cents to ride it? Well, that was big money, to me back in 1972, because I was getting like a quarter a week allowance. So I was like, I'm doubling it up here. So yeah, I'll take the 50 cents. So went through the line and rode the racer and just, fell in love with the racer roller coasters. And, it was nonstop since then.
I grew up in the boondocks as well. I grew up in Maysville, Kentucky, right across the river from Aberdeen, Ohio. And Kings Island for my family was a once a year trip.
Yeah.
And it was, like the night before Santa Claus came. And I do remember my first coaster very well. It was then called Hanna-Barbera Land at Kings Island. That was my first one.
Yeah, that was number 3 for me.
Okay, so of all the coasters you've ridden, what's the one coaster you can think of that scared you the most?
It's the first one, the racer. I was terrified going through the line, and as you keep moving, you're getting closer and closer to that moment where you have to get in the ride. And, I was just terrified about it. And I get in the seat, the lap bar goes down, and it's locked. I can't get out. It's going to happen now. And just climbing that hill, would seem like forever, the lift hill that it took to get to the top. And get to the top, and I looked out and just, you look straight down the racer and you see the split and everything else. And, it goes down those, a couple of small hills, and it went up the 4th hill. That was where it scared me the most, because at that time, that climb seemed like it was just way, way up there. And now it's not a huge hill now, but back then, that to me was like, where were we going? We're going to go right off the track here or something. Now, if you're racing and you're familiar, the second and the third car in each thing you can put your feet up underneath the seat in front of you. I had my feet up under there. You're getting all this massive air time. I'm gripping the buzz bar at the time. And, I'm just holding on for dear life, going around, and it splits, then it comes back in, but you're getting all this air time, and then it comes back in the station. And, I was like, what, just happened? But, a light went on, and it was, like, I love this. Let's go do it again. And I ended up riding it 9 times that day.
So Don, how old were you that day?
9.
9 years old. Okay.
9 years old. Yeah. And just, barely tall enough to ride it.
Interesting. And so, I'm going to guess, living in Ohio, working for Cedar for Kings Island, obviously I'm sure you've been on the other coasters at your park, Cedar Point as well. So you've been on Top Thrill Dragster, right? Lightning Force, right?
Right.
Have you been on coasters like X2 out in Magic Mountain?
Yeah.
Okay, so like all of those, the ones I just mentioned, like those were not scarier when you rode them. It was always that race.
No, not at all. Not just the first time, that I ever went on something like that, and going, that fast, and just felt out of control. But after that, there was never a roller coaster that scared me to go on. There were things about different roller coasters that, based on what they did,
Right.
and going through loops and those kind of things, sometimes I'm a little, apprehensive, and especially as I get older, you can't handle as many of the loops as you could when you were in your teens or something. But those are the kind of things that, just based on what the ride does, more so than ever being terrified of a ride.
So I think you're our first guest. I might be mistaken on this, but I think you're the first guest we've ever had where their first coaster was the one that really conquered their fears.
Yeah, I never had a fear of heights or anything like that. So when I'm a young kid, I have no problem going up in the Eiffel Tower. No problem going up on rides like Drop Tower, Millennium Force, any of those kind of rides. So height never bothered me at all. So it was more of what the ride does, in terms of that kind of a thing, a little bit, where it doesn't always agree with me, but never afraid of anything outside of that first experience.
I remember my scariest ride at Kings Island. Even though my family went to Kings Island every year, I was never really allowed to get on any roller coasters except the Beastie. because I was told all the time growing up, everything was scary. And, you know, that fear over time, it gets pre-programmed into your mind. And we went to my senior night in high school back in 1994. Yes, I'm aging myself a little bit, to Kings Island. And everybody wanted to ride Vortex. And I'd only been on the Beastie, but I wasn't going to be the only one, you know,
Right.
of a whole group of people that wasn't going to ride. So I pretty much did it on a dare. And I got on Vortex. My first ride was at night. And my response was the same as yours when you got off of the racer. When I got off of Vortex, it's like, what have I been missing?
Yeah.
This was actually fun.
Yeah.
Let's go do it again. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. And then I was pretty good, you know, building up the coasters and that sort of thing until I rode. My son got me on Diamondback the first time in 2018, and I think my handprints may still be in those restraints somewhere from the first time that we rode.
Yeah. Now, my mom and dad, they never would ride roller coasters. They always, you know, were afraid of them. You know, thought they were dangerous. They'd always tell me, like, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. And you know, we'd go to the park. Are you sure? Let's go ride this instead. But I would always, you know, tell them, like, you know, I'm more likely to get, you know, hurt watering the lawn. I'm going, you know, I'm going to ride this. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, Kim, it's interesting, and you and I are about the same age, so don't worry about the showing your age thing. But you and I, we are. I think a lot of people, especially people in their maybe some of the later 20s, but certainly 30s, 40s, and older, we both conquered our fears, our coaster fears, and whatnot on an Arrow Mega Looper. For you, it was Vortex. For me, it was Great American Scream Machine at Great Adventure, and it was the same situation for me. I was there with a bunch of friends from school. It was actually senior day at the park, you know, in the spring, right before the end of the school year, before we graduated. And my friends, you know, it was right there in front of the park. My friends dared me to get on it. They, you know, they peer pressured me, but it was my friends. So, you know, it wasn't like, you know, bullying or anything like that. And they were nice about it. And then the same thing when I got off, I'm like, take me to all of the looping coasters, take me to all the coasters I've not been on yet. And so that, you know, that's what you and I went through. I think a lot of people, you know, rides like that because there were so many of them, or even a corkscrew, an older Arrow looper. But Don, I mean, that's awesome. And I just love, that's one of the things I love about doing these interviews is getting different perspectives, you know, where it was your first coaster, it was a Woody, you know, and you know, that's the one that broke your fears. And then everything else was smooth sailing, more or less.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you talk about the Vortex and, you know, when that first came out, you know, as big as that was and 6 inversions, the way I looked at that, because I'd never been on anything, you know, that was that size of a coaster at the time. You know, the Racer and the Beast were the two biggest ones I'd been on, you know, going into 1987. But for me, I looked at Vortex and I said, okay, it's just like the Screaming Demon, only there's 6 more of those loops. I mean, 5 more of the loops there. So
Right.
I just looked at it that way, as I'm doing what I already have done on the Screaming Demon, but just 5 more times.
Now, Don, when was the first time you rode the Beast?
1979. Yeah, when it opened. Yeah, it was, you know, August the 3rd or 2nd, you know, August 2nd, I think it was actually. Yeah. And, you know, because I was playing baseball that summer, I didn't get to the park as early as I wanted to.
Right.
When it first opened in, you know, May, June, July. So we get there in August and, you know, rode it 3 times. The line at that time was like an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes long. You know, you hear these reports about 3-hour wait times and everything for the Beast the first season. It took a while for them to add that 2nd and 3rd train on there. So yeah, those first couple weekends when there was 1 train, yeah, it was going to be 3 hours, 4-hour waits for it. But once they had the 3rd train, that by the time I got there, they were running 3 train operation. And, you know, but that was another one of those things, you know, you ride that ride, it changes your life, doesn't it? You know, because now all of a sudden, you know, there's nothing like this out there anywhere that you'd ever been on. Even to this day, there's nothing like that out there. You know, there's wooden coasters, but none like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk about fear, especially in framing of coasters and thrill rides, you know, there's obviously inversions, there's heights, there's speed, there's acceleration, you know, just, you know, maybe specific elements or, you know, things like that. But there's also, and this is not just with coasters or theme parks or thrills, but also in life, there's fear of the unknown. And the Beast, that's all about the unknown, because you can't, especially back in 79, there was no POVs. It was, very few people had ridden it, even word of mouth. So, and what you can see there in the queue, and like when you first get on the ride, it is a fraction of what the ride's all about. So that there was no fear of the unknown for you getting on that the first time.
No, that made it more exciting for me, that I couldn't tell what it was going to do. Now, I went up in the Eiffel Tower before riding it, looked out, see as much as you could see. You could see the two lift hills at that time. Wasn't as wide open of an area at that point, with the ride, where the bat hadn't been built yet. The vortex wasn't that spot. So it was more trees right there. So it was a little bit more hidden. But I just, looked at it and thought, okay, it's taller than the racer, and but I didn't know what it was going to do. But I thought that made it, even more exciting to get on a ride where I couldn't see it.
Yeah. And actually, that's a really good point. That's one of many flavors of one of the positives of conquering fear with say coasters and rides, in that it goes from being scared of everything, like, oh, scared of the inversion, scared too fast, too tall, to we've broken that fear. It's like, oh, bring it on. You don't know half of what that ride is. Oh, there's another lift hill out there. Oh, there's some crazy tunnel helix thing. Even if you heard it, you get excited about it, or, even not knowing anything about it, like, bring it on. For me, that's exemplary in the past few years. First time I ride a coaster, I'll have my hands up the whole time. In the past, I'd be like, well, I'm going to hold on, or, I don't know what this is about. It's my first time on it. These unknown experiences, bring them on it. Like you said, it makes it more exciting. So
now they had like a cup where you would get like Coke, but they had like the design of the ride on there. The layout.
Yeah.
So I could tell from that, I was like, okay, it doesn't have the hills like the racer. So I might not be coming up and down out of my seat, which is where the fear comes from when you're on a lot of roller coasters with an abundance of airtime. Where I looked at that and I thought, I'm probably not going to get that airtime on this ride. So, that's going to make it okay. Even though you didn't know what it was going to do, I looked at, okay, this is going to be based on speed,
right?
And just ripping, not really like the Kings Island Miami Valley Railroad, only faster is the way I looked at it. Just looking at the glass or the cup.
Right. Makes sense.
Okay. Going back to the racer and that very first ride, how were you feeling when you approached the station?
It was an exhilarating experience. I mean, I'd never had anything like that kind of experience before. So it was, you conquered the fear, number one, of getting on that ride. Then you kind of regretted, why didn't I do this at Coney Island with the Shooting Star with that? But just the most fun I ever had, up to that point in my life. And I couldn't wait to get back in line and ride it again.
It's interesting that you said that, because I've had very mixed feelings going through the stations of rides that I've been afraid of. I remember, that night before I rode Vortex, I was literally scared to death going through the station. I was so nervous. My palms were sweating. I could hardly breathe. I was holding on for dear life, and then, conquer Diamondback. My next step, thing to conquer was Fury. I was nervous as could be going through the stations of both of those coasters. But then when I got to Top Thrill, it was kind of like the calm before the storm.
Mm-hmm.
I was so calm, probably too calm, going all the way through the line queue, waiting through that line. The fear didn't set in until I was in the seat. And that's when I really started contemplating my life decisions as to whether or not that was a wise thing to do. And of course, after we did it the first time, I was then on a mission. I saw all the kids put their hands up on the launch. I'm like, okay, how do I do this? I'm not leaving until I do this, or I'm going to be mad at myself for not overcoming this. It took me 5 rides to finally do it. And then after I did it, I had to ride it again, to make sure when I came back to Cedar Point that I still had that same level of comfort and confidence riding the ride. So it's definitely been a roller coaster of emotions, literally, for me. Basically.
Yeah, it took me about 7, I think it was about my 7th ride on the racer in 72 when I finally put hands up. I wasn't afraid of it after the first ride, but I still, with the airtime, I was still a little apprehensive part of it. But 7th ride, around the 8th ride, I put my hands up and and was able to conquer that fear of not having to grip it as tight.
Another one for me at Kings Island was Drop Tower. I had not written anything really, other than the vortex. And I just decided it was back in my 20s at some point. I was in college. One day I just decided it would be a bright idea to hop on Drop Tower. And I'd never experienced any sort of force like that before. I remember quite well when I came off of Drop Tower, I was literally walking sideways and I had to go sit down for about 30 minutes. This is a true story. And it wasn't until spring of last year, 2021, I looked at my son. I said, this is it. This is the day. I'm now getting my revenge on Drop Tower. We're doing this. You've done, I kept telling myself, I'm like, you've done Top Thrill Dragster. You've done, all the rest of this. There's absolutely no reason you cannot get on a Drop Tower and enjoy it. And we did it. I held on for dear life the first time, first few times. I don't remember exactly how many rides it took, but he told me, he said, now, this is something we learned from our Coaster Kids friends. He said, you got to drop zombie style. That's when you put your hands and feet out in front of you when you drop. And I'm now happy to say that is the only way I ride Drop Towers.
Yeah, the thing I love about Drop Tower and those types of rides is no matter how many times you ride them, it's never the same experience because you just cannot get used to that second when it's going to drop. No matter how many times you do it, you can never anticipate, here it is, and be ready for that.
Good point.
Absolutely. So you said when you got off of that first ride from Racer, you wanted to do it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other feelings you had after that first ride?
I think it was just that, first I thought, being that young or whatever, that, I felt like I was an adult because I could handle it a little bit. But no, I don't know. I mean, really, it was just one of those feelings that, you just didn't have something like that. It wasn't something you could do at home. It wasn't an everyday experience. It was unique. It was fun. It was interesting. I was trying to figure out how it stays on the track. All those kind of things was going through my mind that first day on it.
Did it impact your life? And if so, in what ways after riding the coaster?
It did impact my life, but not until later in the 80s when I started going up there and riding it over and over again. And so I kind of really, I would say, who I kind of am as a person, what I became, what I'm able to do, with my job and all those kind of things. That doesn't happen if I don't ride the Racer like I did in the 1980s. Growing up, I wasn't one of the popular kids in school or anything like that. I was kind of, I would use the word very introverted, didn't really talk to anybody, wouldn't raise my hand to answer questions in school. Didn't really fit in with the neighborhood kids. The only time that I really felt, like I was having a good time or fit in was when I was either playing sports, going to a sporting event, or at an amusement park. So it was kind of like that escape for me to get away from, what I was growing up with in my neighborhood. It just wasn't fun. I had a lot of, kids that would like pick on me. I was, not that tall, I was kind of scrawny and that. So it was very easy for the kids to kind of like bully me, push me around and that kind of thing. So, doing what I did with the Racer and being forced into talking about it with the media and everything by the PR team at that time in the 1980s with the media and that, it kind of made me more outgoing. And, I felt more comfortable around people. I didn't trust people, during my years in elementary school and middle school, high school. And it was Kings Island where there was, a couple of people that for the first time I said, these people are genuinely nice to me. I'd never experienced that before until I got to Kings Island. So those kind of things, just being able to trust people, talk to people, just open up a little bit and not be so introverted and reserved.
I can relate to you real well on the school experience. I shared with you earlier that when I first started to come into the coaster community, my goal was to, just blend in, not even really be seen, much less heard. And that was through repeated, being made fun of all the way through school. If I wasn't made fun of for one thing when I was younger, I was chubby, I was made fun of for that. Then once I hit middle school, I started thinning out. So I was made fun of for other things. And it just, went all the way through high school. And another reason I am on this podcast, I am on a mission to overcome my fear of public speaking, because when you're treated like that in school and then you're stood up in front of the class to give presentations and you're mocked and made fun of and that sort of thing, it has a lasting impact. And here I am at 46 years old, just working on my public speaking skills. That's just another level of fear for me that I'm working to overcome.
Yeah, I never would have been able to get up in front of a group of people and speak had I not done what I did with the racer. And that doesn't happen if I don't have those first feelings from that first visit, what I ended up doing in the 1980s with it. But it just, made me, more outgoing, more comfortable talking to people. Ruth Voss was the PR manager back in the 1980s. She, would have media come out and talk to me. So I had to say some things. I look back, now, if I was to pull out the tapes and watch some of those first interviews I did in 1981 when I was approaching like 1,000 rides on the racer, and I would cringe, because I didn't really know what to say or anything like that. But, then people start to know who I was at the park, whether it was the associates, you would have other pass holders and that. And then it just became a situation where, I was forced into interacting and talking with people. And had I not done that, I'm still probably the same person today that I would have, I wasn't, in high school coming out and not, not wanting to talk or interact with people. I would just be kind of a loner.
That's pretty awesome, Don. I've not been interviewed like that, as far as, having, achieved so many rides. The only ride actually personally that I've kept track of re-rides on, because it became my number one last year, and being a much bigger enthusiast now than I've been in the past, much more into the hobby, is Velocicoaster, and I'm up to like 141 rides on it or something like that. But there's many other rides I've been on many times, but just haven't kept track. But I've got a couple friends here in Florida, more towards Tampa. They live in Tampa, and since Iron Gwazi opened, they kind of competing with each other. They're both ACE members like myself, for most rides on Iron Gwazi, and I don't think about many hundreds at this point. The ride's only been open for a few months as we record here, but I just, it's great enthusiasm. But I mean, for you, this is, back in the late 70s and 80s, to get over 1,000 rides, that early time period, that's, and that's awesome. That's just so awesome.
Yeah. And, back then too, when you think about, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, which you have to talk to be able to do that. Now I could sit in a little booth and describe the game and all that, but it's just me talking, and I'm not seeing the people in front of me, so I wasn't really going to have to interact with people. So I was okay with that part of it. But you put me in a group when I was 18, 19 years old, I felt awkward. I just didn't know how to go about it.
Yeah, of course. No kidding. And by the way, Kim, I've made a mental note. So, you're probably going to hope I don't remember this. So when we have our next meetup, hopefully we have a meetup this year, like we did last year, we will have to make sure that you are part of the presentation, reading, talking to everyone before we get on the coaster, whatever we're doing. So that way you can do some public speaking in front of people live. So.
Absolutely. I'm actually up for that.
Nice.
It's interesting because, people have asked me as a teacher, they're like, if you're public speaking, you're in front of people all day, every day. I'm like, no, I'm in front of children. I teach elementary school. For me, that's a lot different than standing up and speaking at a staff meeting.
Right.
And, that's, and I still, it's a lot better, but, once in a while that voice will still creep into my head. And I just have to remind myself, these are not the same people that did that. They're not going to respond to you this way. So out with the negative and in with the positive. You can do this. And the more I do it, the easier it gets, but it's still a work in progress.
Nice.
Okay. So for our next question, of all of the coasters you've ridden, what has been your craziest moment on a coaster?
It was the Beast. 1982, and it looked like it was going to rain. It was sprinkling a little bit, so we still get on the train front seat. But as the train's going up the lift hill, all of a sudden, it just started pouring.
Oh,
Hard. I mean, it just was coming down like the type of rain where you're on the road driving, you can't see in front of you. And if you're the ride crew, I mean, you can't just leave people sitting on the lift hill, so you got to cycle them through. So I was kind of laughing a little bit going up the lift hill, but as soon as it went down the drop and that's just hitting my face and everything, it hurt. And then going, through the whole ride, it just, I never had felt there was like needles and everything like hitting your face. And then as soon as we hit the brake run coming back into the station, it stopped raining. I'm soaked. Everyone else in the train soaked. We all just felt like we got, just pelted with this stuff. But that was probably the wildest different ride experience that I've ever had. And nowadays, they wouldn't run with the weather, they would know that it was coming in or something like that. But just one of those pop-up things that just happened to hit. It lasted about 5 minutes, the length of the ride, and it was done. The sun came out, but I remember that ride.
So Don, my first visit to Kings Island was back in 2001. This is, the Jeff Siebert days and so forth. And wound up meeting up some ACE members that I was friends with online. This is before Facebook and social media. This is like Roller Coaster Talk on Yahoo. And they were, ACE members, and was telling them I was heading out there. I said, oh, when you come to Kings Island, we want to show you around, make sure you have a great day. And it's awesome. And I've done that many times since at my own parks and whatnot. But it was a couple of guys and they were so nice. And they saw Jeff around the park and introduced me to him. And just a wonderful day, a magical day. And we'd ridden the Beast during the day, and I was blown away by it. And we were in the park in the evening. It had gotten dark, and I don't know what we were doing, but the guy said, wait a second, it's nighttime. We got to night ride in the Beast. And so we get over there, and the whole station's made out of wood, and we're right towards the front of the line. And the ride up on the microphone's getting everyone riled up, and everyone's stamping their feet on the wood. And I was getting caught up in the moment. It was awesome. And then we get on it, and I didn't realize, because we were inside with the protection of the station, but it was raining. So not only was my first night ride, but my first night ride with rain, steady rain. But the Beast, as you said earlier, is a speed machine for a wooden coaster. And I wouldn't say it hurt. It hurt here and there, but it was just a crazy experience being my first night ride and having that rain as well, because I hadn't really ridden coasters in the rain before that. And go figure, my first on the Beast. So
yeah, with the racer, with just the series of hills, when I've ridden in the rain, it wasn't as bad. With the Beast, it's the straightaways, and when you're in the front, it was just coming right down on me. And but I remember, it's one of the most memorable rides I've ever had.
That's awesome.
One of my craziest moments on a coaster involves tsunami type rain as well, and it was on a coaster, Kings Island. It was back in 2020 when we had to wear the mask. It had barely rained a drop a whole day. Weather was fine. And we were in line for the last train of the night on Orion. And about 10 minutes before we got on the coaster, it just absolutely started pouring in sheets. And all these people were running out of line, scattering like ants. And we're like, well, we're going to get soaked running to the parking lot, so we may as well go ahead and ride. And I remember my kids got in the front. I went in the back. It reminded me of that song, Hurt So Good, from the 80s. But the funny part was, with that mask on, first of all, with my glasses, I couldn't see a thing. And I had water up my nose throughout the entire ride. I could not breathe. And I just know when we got off that coaster, we laughed all the way to the car. We could not stop laughing. It was just so funny. And what was even funnier were the looks we got in Speedway after we left the park.
Yeah.
What happened to them? But that's one of my crazy stories from the rain. And there's definitely nothing quite like a pins and needles rain ride. That's for sure. But my kids got it worse in the front than I did in the back, so I called that a win.
I would too.
All right. So you've told us your favorite coaster is the Racer. What would you say is your least favorite coaster of all the coasters you've ridden?
The least favorite, it's no longer operating. It was Drachenfire at Busch Gardens, Virginia. There was an ACE event, ACE conference, 1992. And the ride looked really good, from the midways and that. I mean, it looked good. It was just painful, just getting slammed into the seats and everything on the ride. I got off the ride and I was like, I got to do it again just to make sure it was that rough, that hard. It was again. So now I'm like, well, maybe the third time's the charm.
Oh, no.
It was like instant headaches, just getting, it was just hard on the body at that point in time, so that would be the one that I would say, it was just not, like, I would say the ride that wasn't fun. The only coaster I've ever been on where I just did not have fun on it.
You are a tougher person than I am.
I had to make sure it wasn't just me. I'm like, okay, I rode near the front. Well, maybe it's the middle seat. No, let's try in the back. No. But the third time I was like, okay.
So Don, you don't have any, as they say, Togo coasters, tried ones, got off, which many Togo coasters that made by Togo are, but anyway, you don't have anything like that. You always give it a couple more chances. And
yeah. I mean, I always do. I always want to make sure, because sometimes it's where you sit, on the train, with different rides, but no, I mean, everything else, I've always had fun on just about every other coaster I've ever been on, but that was just the one that, I gave it 3 chances and it was just a no. And there's a reason why it didn't last long, obviously. So
right. 3 strikes are out. Yeah.
I have a few of what Andrew calls Togo coasters. For me, I call them one and done. I remember King Cobra back at King's Island, and I had a wonderful experience on that ride.
Speaking of Togos, by the way.
Yeah.
That
was a fun one. And I remember on the first trip we took to Carowinds, I got the bright idea to get on Vortex. I was so excited and telling my children just how fun King Cobra was. That was one and done. My legs felt like they were going to explode. It absolutely beat my head to death. And when I have 2 children look at me saying the same thing, we didn't ride again. And the other one that I think is quite comparable to that, there's a couple. Blue Flash, the John Ivers backyard coaster. Got to ride that one last July. And that's turned into one of those, I mean, it's literally a ride at your own risk deal.
Yeah.
For a reason. I did great on the first ride. He asked me, he said, do you want to ride again? I said, no, I'm not going to tempt fate. He told me basically how and when to move. I did it right the first time, but I didn't injure myself. So I called that a win, but I didn't want to try that one again. And then last year we went up to Michigan's Adventure Thunderhawk. I've never felt a coaster feel like it was going to amputate my arms. It was the worst shoulder pain I think I've ever experienced in my entire life. I could not bring myself to get on that coaster again. So we've talked about your love of coasters, but I also know that you love theme parks.
I do.
Coasters. As a theme park enthusiast, what are the things you look for in a park visit to make it the best experience possible for you?
Well, what I do before I go, I kind of, want to research it and see what rides that I want to do, make a priority list to make sure I'm hitting those early in the day. So I'm not, riding them at the time where the line might be the longest. So I want to do things like that and make sure that I definitely get the priority list knocked off. I'm looking for things too, that if I'm with my family or friends, things that we can all do together. I mean, it's not fun if you're on a coaster and, your 2 friends or your spouse and, your child's not tall enough to ride or something like that, so it's important to me that there's as many rides as possible that we can all do together. So I look for that. And then I'm also looking for, those opportunities where there's, it's going to save time, but also money. So that might mean like a fast lane, one of those types of passes, or, dining plan, something like that, where I'm going to save time and save money, as well, going to the park. So I'm looking for all those different kind of things, but atmosphere is very important to me. You want to feel like you've stepped into a different world, when you go to a park. You don't want to feel like you're still, in the city, or, just your normal day life. You want to feel like you got away when you go to a park. So I'm looking for that too.
Absolutely. And it's that escape from reality. When I go to a theme park, it just makes you feel like you're living a whole other life, your best life in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I look for a theme park that makes memories worth repeating.
Exactly. That's the perfect word for it. Is memories worth repeating.
Yeah, and like you said, Kim, being in the moment, which is the core of mental health and self-care and therapy, and where theme park therapy comes in is being in the moment. You're not worried about the future anxiety or thinking about the past, lamenting and feeling depression. You're just in that moment, enjoying yourself, whether it be the ride or just the atmosphere or the people you're with. And that's what theme parks are all about, because they promote so much positivity and so much focus on what you're doing right then and there. So.
Absolutely. And that's a common thread I have found in the community. And that's one way I have found of, building relationships and lifelong friendships with people that I don't have a lot in common with. You can spend time looking at the ways that you're different, or, and picking that apart, or you can look at the things, that you do have in common. And the common love of theme parks, the common love of roller coasters, when you come together and you focus on that, it just benefits everybody. Okay, so let's go back to the racer. You've told us about your first ride on the racer, and you gave us a lot of details about that. Do you remember how and when you went from liking the racer to loving the racer?
It was, right off the bat. I mean, I always loved the ride with that. But I would say, we got into the 1980s. It went from loving the ride to, I would use the word maybe obsessed, with the ride, because I was going there just about every day, specifically to ride that.
Well, I think that's awesome.
So was it love? Was it love at first ride, Don?
First ride. There you go. That's great.
Right.
That can make a great T-shirt there.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I totally get that obsession thing, because I've told friends many times it's a good thing that I live in Louisville and I don't live near Kings Island, or that might become a problem.
Well, when I lived there in 1988 in Louisville, I was still going to Kings Island like 4 times a week. And I would get off work at 5 o'clock. I'd get there about 7. I'd stay till close, drive all the way back, come back the next day, do the same thing all over again. If it was I had 2 days off during the week, I was going to be at the park from, open to close. So yeah, I had a lot of miles to my car that summer.
I bet. Well, Kim, you know where I live, and you know where my number one is. And I've always prided myself on my self-control. So, as much as I would love to be at Islands Adventure every day, I'm not, because I got too much other things going on in life, work and, other interests. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I don't judge people. Like Don, I don't judge you for being obsessed. There was McLean Waddell out in North Carolina. He's the Fury guy. He's been on Fury over 8,000 times, which, again, you've been on Racer more, but Racer's a lot older too. So, I mean, there's people out there that have been on, my friend Joe, she's been on Make over 3,000 times. I think it's cool. I don't look at it as like, imbalance or anything. For me, I guess I just have too much going on to get to that level, but you never know. So
that would be my fear, would be that being that close to the park would distract me.
I got too many other distractions
that I have to be doing. It seemed like a wise idea till get up the next morning and can't wake up. But luckily I have my summers off. So that gives me plenty of time to get to the park. And then once we get back into school in the fall, my big road trips and stuff, for the year are mostly over. So we're able to make it on most weekends, which is a nice stress relief with, the start of each school year. It very much helps offset that.
Yeah, when I look back on that, and I was there just about every day in the, throughout the 1980s, riding the racer, sure, there was a lot of, better things I could have been doing with my life at that time. I could have, probably at that point in time had a better job and all that. But because I wanted a job that I had the flexibility to be able to go there all the time. But, I look back on it, I'm like, nobody was having more fun than me doing that. And that's what it's all about. I mean, you want to have fun. You want to, do the things that you enjoy, not do the things that everyone else thinks you should enjoy.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Don. One of the sayings, as they say, the kids say these days that I certainly say myself is, the saying, living your best life.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that, is living what you prioritize, what's important to you, what works for you, what gives you a positive life, what makes you happy. You're living your best life. And that's awesome. Making it so that, even back in the 80s, you could go every day and ride for several hours.
Yeah, and I had so many people telling me, that's dumb, that's stupid, you're wasting your time and all that. But you know what? I mean, that's what made me happy. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and that's all that matters, is you were making yourself happy. So that's fantastic.
And for me, I can tell you, the off season, once Kings Island shuts down and I don't have anywhere to go, that's a hard time for me because, that's also a very busy time of year at my job. And, I tend to, get into stress overload and that sort of thing. And, while we're off, I try to, focus on exercise and other things too, to help offset stress and keep myself in a mentally positive place. But, as we get towards the end of the school year, particularly in Louisville, I have my school, I think it's about a 98% poverty rate. A lot of the kids do not want to be home for the summer. They don't want to. So they go through basically a cycle that we're very familiar with. And as we get closer to the end of the year, some of them will go through what's called sabotaging the relationship. It's easier to act up, cause problems, and break that relationship that they've built up with that teacher, as opposed to having to say goodbye. So, work can become very trying for me as we get closer to the end of the school year and the kids anticipate that don't want to be home for that length of time. And, when Kings Island, we went opening weekend and it literally was just the wind to fill up my sails. I came back, I was supercharged with energy because, I was getting to the point where I was just tired all day, every day. And I realized, what, you need to smile because, if you're looking grumpy, the kids are going to be, grumpy and that sort of thing too. And just doing that and getting myself recharged, I've got the energy to keep up with the kids. And during what can be more of a negative time, in the classroom, getting towards the end of the school year, I've never been better. And, the kids are energetic, but I'm energetic too. We're having a great time. And it's due to that mental refreshment that I got from going and being able to spend a full 12-hour day at our home away from home.
Kim, what is this off season you're speaking of?
Andrew, I know that's a fairy tale world for you. Ha ha ha. Very slow clap. I'm done. All right. So I heard Andrew mention you counting rides on the racer. What inspired you to begin counting them? When did you start counting them?
Well, from day one, going to the park, I grew up playing sports, so I was very statistically oriented. I'd always know if I went 2 for 5 in a baseball game, what that was going to make my batting average. I knew all my hockey stats and everything. So I was always, into the statistics. So I always thought it would be interesting, for me when we'd go to the park. I'd have the park map, and I would write down, what we rode and everything, and put the date on it, and just toss it in the glove compartment or whatever of the car. And but I always wanted to see, how we spent the day. What I was going to ride the most, and just what my average rides per day were going to be on. Whether it's the race or the beast, all those other kind of attractions. So it kind of evolved from there into what it did. But it started out just because that's just what I did. I just tracked. I just thought it was interesting with the analytical part of me, what I was going to do the most on those visits. And I started that in 1972 with the park map, just writing down, what we rode, little stick figures on everything around the map.
That is so interesting, because I know a lot of people don't really start counting coaster credits, or let alone, rides on a specific coaster, until they've been riding for a number of years.
Yeah, but I mean, I was counting, like, if it was at Kings Island in 1972, Gulliver's Rub-a-Dub, I counted how many times I rode that. So it wasn't just roller coaster, it was every single ride in the park.
Okay.
And then because I kept, was doing that, you just keep doing that, just what happens.
Do you still do that with everything?
I do.
You ride?
I do.
Now, do you use modern tools like Log Ride for that, or?
No, I just have like an Excel sheet now that I would write things into, but I'm not right now. I'm not, when I go back at Kings Island, I'm not spending 10 to 10 there writing everything. So it's not as difficult to keep track now. It's okay. I rode the racer once, the train once, the carousel once, you just add it to that list. But, back in the 80s, when I was there all the time riding the racer, I mean, the park map, every day I'd write down the date, how many times I rode every single ride around the park. And, I still have those maps, they're in a box somewhere in my house here, but I still have, everything. That's how I knew how many visits I had, how many rides I had, from that.
That's cool. Wow.
So how many rides do you currently have on Racer?
12,063.
Wow.
Now, 10,000 of those came from 1981 to 1990. So it took me 10 years to get 10,000 rides, and then it's taken me now another 32 years to get to get 2,063 rides. So I definitely have slowed down a little bit, but that's because life and work got in the way. I started working for a hockey team in 1990, right after I got done with the 10,000 rides, and you just don't have the time. Got married, you just don't have the time that you had before to do that. It would have been very easy for me to go from 10,000 rides to have 50,000 rides. It never got boring. That was a thing for me too. I didn't set out to set any kind of record on that. It just evolved into what it did. My thing was, I just loved the whole park atmosphere, doing all the rides. The racers, what I was known for. But I never did it because I had to have, 5,000 rides, 7,000 rides, 10,000 rides, because then if I put a goal to it and I put a number that's what I'm going to try to go to, then it does, I think, become a job. I always said I was going to ride it till it wasn't fun anymore. Well, at 10,000, it was still fun, but I was like, well, I better start getting on with it though, or I'm going to have 50,000 rides on this. So, it just never got boring, and it had to become that, or it had felt like I was obligated to do it. I wouldn't have kept doing it in the 1980s.
So we've discussed your love of roller coasters, your love of theme parks, and your hobby as a theme park enthusiast, but you've also contributed many, many things to the theme park industry. Of the contributions that you've made to the theme park industry, what do you feel is your greatest contribution to the theme park industry, and why do you feel that it's your greatest contribution?
Well, I think there's a couple things that I would look at. I would look at from the guest perspective when I was riding the racer. I think, what I did in the 1980s, there was a lot of attention on that, a lot of media coverage in that. And it was something that went, kind of international almost with the coverage when I would hit those milestone rides. So I think just at that point in time, just, the awareness that roller coasters are out there, keeping the racer relevant at a time when all these other roller coasters were popping up. The Beast in 1979 was the big thing, but then you had rides like the Vortex. But you go around the country and it was the roller coaster, wars were on. Everybody was building roller coasters. So to keep the racer, which really, jump started that second golden age of roller coasters when it debuted in 1972. So I think to keep that ride relevant through the 80s was one thing that was kind of a contribution, I think, because of what I was doing from the ride, with the ride. But I think, in the other terms of it, as far as, becoming involved with the industry, working for the park, and that, I think it was like creating an event like Coaster Stock, where it was getting all these different clubs coming together as one, so everybody, just the camaraderie part of it, having people, enjoy what an amusement park, what a theme park is, more so than, trying to, rack up credits or doing, those kind of things. So I think that would be a contribution, is just trying to, is just getting everybody together as one, bigger groups of people from all these different walks of life and different enthusiast groups.
Mm. Don, as I mentioned earlier, my first visit to Kings Island was in 2001, and then I went again in 2003. And both those visits were under the Paramount days, and I had a wonderful time. I really thought the Kings Island was a really magical place. And then I went back in 2017, and I had a decent time, but I felt like something was lost. Now, back in 2017, I mean, I've considered myself an enthusiast since the 90s to a certain degree, but I wasn't as involved in the enthusiast community until, say, the past 3 or 4 years. So 2017, I kind of really didn't know a lot of enthusiasts, personally, maybe some people on Facebook, but I've made so many friends since then, and went back to Kings Island for my most recent visit last year. So 2017, and then went back in 2021. And that was a completely different visit, because again, I had so many friends now in the enthusiast community, and was with Larry and Gene the whole time, Larry and G Lyons, and, met up with Jeff and Logan Joyner, and there's so many other people. In fact, Road Racer with Jeff and Logan. Then we had a wonderful ride on Racer, with the recent refurbs done on it and the retracking. Wonderful ride on it, better than previous rides I'd remembered. But, Kings Island became, and we went to Cedar Point that same trip too. Cedar Point's a wonderful park. But Kings Island was magical again for me, like it was that first couple visits in the early 2000s, but not just because of the park, but because of the people. And I've talked to David about this. I've been in many parks, and there's some great parks out there, including one just a few minutes down the street here. But Kings Island is very much an enthusiast park. Last ride of the night on the Beast, or on Orion, and I've been to a lot of events over the years, club events, Ace especially, Coaster Crew now, I'm a member there too. And I've been to Hollywood Nights, and I'm excited to go again this year. Kim and I will be there. And Hollywood Nights is incredible because it's as much of a social event as it is getting on the voyage and all that. But when I think about things, and I think about what you do with Coaster Stock, because I've never done Coaster Stock, which is what I'm leaning to here. I feel like I need to go. Larry and Gene have been trying to talk me into going, and it's not that I don't want to. It's just, it's fitting it in and traveling, because it's not nearby for me. But I think, after kind of hearing you talk about it and them talk about it, I really want to commit to going, and in a future year, because, the enthusiast park, Kings Island, what it is, combined with a special event like that, and what you do at that event, I know I've seen all the coverage, what people get to do, the unique experiences. I can't wait to experience it, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And, the more I think about that question too, Kim, is, maybe it's, when you look back on when I first started riding the Racer all the time, there wasn't, there was Carl Eichelman was riding the Beast, and I was, doing the Racer. But Carl didn't sustain it. I did, went on and did that for the decade long. I think maybe one of my contributions would be, for people who love theme parks, it was okay to go more than once a year. It was okay if this is your interest to nobody really, the season passes had just been out for a couple of years. So it wasn't that common, where people would go maybe once or twice a year, but, maybe it was okay if this is what you like to do, go do it, and then you start to see, as you get into the late 80s, the 90s, up to today, you talk about the Fury guy with 8,000 rides, things like that maybe, my contribution was, just kind of being a little bit of a trendsetter in the 1980s, telling enthusiasts, it's okay. If this is what you like, don't hide it. Don't be afraid of what your friends think. Go do it. Have fun.
Now, by the way, Don, I'm assuming, but, sometimes maybe it's not, you can't always assume, because sometimes you're wrong, but is Coaster Stock, is it a reference to Woodstock? Is that how you named it?
Gathering of people. That's what I wanted it to be, because I knew I called it that because, the Woodstock was that gathering of people coming together. So that's where the name came from, because I knew that people were going to descend upon Kings Island from, coast to coast Canada, so we get to that event, anywhere from 25 to 30 states. We get Canada. Sometimes we get, European countries, and that COVID kind of slowed that down the last couple of years.
Right.
But we had years, we had, people from Switzerland, Japan, London, coming to this event. So, so I looked at it as what would be the right name when, we're looking at this as being, not a kind of a regional local thing, but just a gathering of all these enthusiasts from everywhere. And the name Coaster Stock kind of evolved from that thought process.
That's great. Well, I definitely, as I was alluding to earlier, I definitely plan on representing the great state of Florida in the future of Coaster Stock. So.
And you've definitely hit the nail on the head when you said a gathering of people, because when I think of Coaster Stock, the first thing as an enthusiast that I don't really think of is riding coasters. It's the people, it's the family atmosphere. And, we've seen all of the activities that are planned for this year. And I'm just so excited because I view it also as, I'm going to be with my group, but if we're going to be randomly picked to be put possibly with other people, here's another opportunity to make even yet more friends.
Yeah, and it's designed to do things like that with these different activities where you're in a group of people you don't even know. Last year, we have a game that's called KI Monopoly. So we had people that have never met each other. They're all thrown in this room and they're playing this tournament. Well, by the end of that, those 8 people, spent the second day there. They were together all the time because they just hit it off. So those are the kind of things that I try to do is to get like-minded people together, make new friends, but also, look forward to seeing that the friends that you'd met and just really have it be that one big family reunion.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I view it, as an opportunity to possibly reach out to somebody that could be in the same position I was in a few years ago. Maybe they're there by themselves and they don't really know anybody, so just, another opportunity to bring someone into the circle of friends, make them feel included, and hopefully make them want to come back again and join us.
Yeah. Last year, I think it was last year, we had, before one of the guest speaker things, I started asking the crowd, I started pointing to people and I said, who you with? Somebody says American Coaster Enthusiast. Point to someone else. Who you with? Great Ohio Coaster Club. Point to someone else. Who you with? I'm with Coaster Buzz. Another one, I'm with Coaster Crew. And finally, one guy, I said, what about you? And he goes, I'm with Coaster Stock. And then everybody was like, oh yeah, that's it. So everybody kind of dropped their guard on what club you were with, was no longer, the political piece of it and all that. And it was just everybody just together for the same reason. You just love parks. You want to have fun. You want to talk to people that share that same interest.
And I did hear you mention earlier too, you felt like it was a big contribution, keeping the racer relevant, through the development of different types of coasters. And I just want to say, at least from my perspective, you've really knocked the ball out of the park this year and last year too, making the racer still relevant in the year 2022.
Yeah, a lot of work has gone into it.
With the retrack, and when I saw it on opening day this year, wow. I mean, I've never in my lifetime seen racer look like that. I've seen pictures of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, the one time I rode it this year, right before we opened on the first weekend, as the train got to the top of the lift and I looked out again and saw it all red, white, and blue, it just brought the flashback, to 1972 all over again for me. So for me, like I said, a lot of people, a lot of our guests, majority of our guests, since it's been 30 something years, had never seen it red, white, and blue. But for me, it brought it like full circle back to how it was supposed to be.
I was so excited because I wasn't even born until 1975. Honestly, don't remember when I started riding racer, but when I saw it, to me, it was literally just like a walk back in time.
Mm-hmm.
This was it. This is what it was like, and the oohing and the awing of opening day. I just felt so excited, like I was riding it for the first time all over again. It's absolutely incredible.
Don, for my visit this year to Kings Island, I'm definitely planning to go. I'm gonna talk to Larry and Gene about it, and just I'm just waiting to make sure the beast is reopened. That's one of the things I'm excited about. But besides that, I mean, besides the typical stuff, seeing friends there and just the camaraderie and the people, and then some of my favorite rides there, great coasters. I'm some of the visual things I'm looking forward to. One of them is I'm very patriotic and seeing the red, white, and blue. The updated paint scheme and freshened paint scheme, I should say, for Racer. But the other is also visual, which is friend of mine, friend of the podcast, actually, Aaron from Pursuit of Thrills. The incredible work that he did with the banner and I guess some of the other artwork in the park. Very proud of what he's done. He's had quite a year doing that, and then he just got married, and I'm just so happy for him. He's a great guy. And actually had him on the podcast here. So I'm just excited seeing that and this visual stuff and, riding the Racers and how it's being kept up so well. And, it's just something that's just so phenomenal, by the way, about Kings Island is, it's a great collection of coasters, great collection of rides, great food, Rosa's Pizza, that's all I need right there. And other things, of course, are great too. But I love steel and wood coasters equally. In fact, a couple of coasters that are in my top 10 are wood coasters. I'm not one of those only steel or only wood, but I do love wooden coasters. And just the wood coaster collection at Kings Island is second to none. Second to none. Even before the retracking of the Beast. I rode the Beast last summer. And I know it wasn't at that point as great as it was in the early days, but you know what? It still ran wonderfully. I had a blast on it last ride. One night I was there. Mystic Timbers is one of my favorite GCIs, if not, it's very high up there. Fantastic, unique layout. And the Racer, just the love that you guys have given it, retracking and now the painting. But it's so much fun to ride. I was blown away by how good my Racer ride was last summer. So I mean, just the love of wooden coasters, these classic designs, if you will. It's another thing that makes Kings Island so special.
Yeah, and when you talk about the Racer and the Beast, putting the work that we have done and done with it and with the retracking and a little bit of reprofiling, but those rides, the Racer 50th anniversary, the Beast is 43. We want those rides to be around for another 40, 50 years for everybody to enjoy. So, it's great that there's that commitment, by Cedar Fair to keep those rides in mint condition.
Okay, so we have talked about how riding coasters, particularly that first ride on the Racer, has impacted your life. How would you say that working in the theme park industry specifically has impacted your life?
For me to be able to, work in an industry that I love, but to be able to do it at a place that I grew up, my childhood years, my, young adult years, to be able to do all of that, my own backyard, that makes it extra special. With that, most people, you have to go somewhere else to do what you want to do. Whether it's the theme parks, the sports industry, I had to do that with hockey when I was working for hockey teams, go to different cities and that to do what I wanted to do. So to be able to do that there at Kings Island, where I grew up, that makes it, special. But I think also what's, impacted it for me is just the little things and just seeing everybody have as much fun as I did. We spend, all winter, and those, I won't use the word off season because there is no off season really when you do what we do, but to see everybody, coming through those gates every morning, that's rewarding to see that, you got the word out, that you're open, you got the word out about this event. Those kind of things are as thrilling as riding a ride when you work for a park, you work in the industry, to see the results of all the effort you put into making, sure people are aware that this is happening.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Let's talk about advice that you could have to give to other people that may be, stuck in fear, wanting to overcome fear, or, just life goals in general. What advice can you give to those that are listening tonight?
I think you want to step out a little bit out of your own, your comfort zone. Sometimes, everybody's afraid to do this or afraid to do that. But just sometimes take a chance and just, go out and just try to have some fun. But I think, too, do you, don't try to do what everyone else wants you to do. Don't try to do things the way people want you to do it. Do it the way that works best for you as an individual, what you're comfortable with. But that would be the advice I would have for people is, don't let other people influence who and what you are.
Absolutely. And that's something I myself have been a work in progress on over the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, there's pressure too. I mean, you get a lot of pressure from friends, family members, and sometimes you got to just find a way, around that to, you want to be happy. You only go around once. So if you're living what someone else wants you to be, you're not going to be happy. You're going to be miserable a lot of times. So just have that courage to, be yourself and do the things that you like to do, the things you enjoy doing. And if you do that, you're just going to feel more fulfilled and just feel better about everything.
Absolutely. That it brings me back to the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'm sure you've probably seen that.
Oh, yeah.
I still remember his infamous quote, "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it."
Yes.
And truer words were never spoken.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you do miss it if you start to worry about these little things, you're too guarded on things, or you get caught up in things that don't really matter at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Okay. And for your last question, where can we find you on social media?
Well, the best place is probably going to be on Twitter. It's just Don Hilbig at twitter.com. Facebook, just under my name, and same thing with Instagram. So those are the three places that I'm at. I'm most active, however, on Twitter. And those are the kind of places if somebody had questions or wanted to interact, whatever, that's the best channel to do that with.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on the podcast. I know with the opening of Kings Island and Coaster Stock approaching, you've had a very busy schedule. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and share your story. So thank you for being on the Coaster Challenge podcast, Don.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks. And, I want to thank you for having me on the podcast, because it's always, nice to be able to talk with people who share the same interests that I do.
It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to see more of us, we upload every Friday. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all at Coaster Challenge. Links are in the description below. Thanks for joining us here today.